now to a WSLS 10 special investigation. A few weeks ago, a man from Virginia involved in a child endangerment case agreed to a shortened sentence with the condition that he become sterilized, a controversial decision that drew national attention.
However, as it turns out, the idea of sterilization is nothing new in the Commonwealth. In fact, about 8,000 people have been sterilized by law since 1924. In fact, it was a measure started by the state to prevent what they classified as the mentally ill from having children. Ananda Rochita talked to 4 victims who were all sterilized at the Central Virginia Training Center in Madison Heights and what they hope the state will do to compensate them for what they've lost.
In the early to mid-1900s, these now abandoned buildings at the Central Virginia Training Center in Madison Heights were filled with hundreds of children and young adults. They are brought to the hospital deemed unfit or mentally deficient for society.
Both of us up here at the same time.
Sadie and Janet Ingram, sisters raised in foster care, were dropped off as children here by their social workers.
All we could do was look out the windows.
They both described the training center as a jail, and by the time doctors told them they could leave, the sisters had unknowingly undergone surgery. Janet and Sadie were both sterilized.
But I didn't know what they were going to do to us. After it was all over, they took me back in my bedroom. I got in the bed, and I woke up, and my stomach was hurting. I said, something's wrong with my stomach. And I looked down there. It was a long cut, and it had staples in it.
Sterilization was a measure started by the state to prevent what they classified as the mentally ill from having children. To understand why this happened, we have to go back about 90 years when the Eugenical Sterilization Act was signed into law in Virginia. Under the act, people who were considered mentally ill, have any form of insanity, or even poor, had to be sent to state institutions like this one.
And I don't think it's right.
As a teenager, Lewis Reynolds was sterilized here because doctors diagnosed him with epilepsy after suffering temporary seizures when he was accidentally hit in the head with a rock.
And I think it's wrong for them to take my rights away from me having a family and grandchildren. I live by myself, and nobody there that helped me out whatsoever.
After leaving the center, he would serve 30 years in the Marine Corps, a man who the state labeled unfit to have children. However, during Reynolds' childhood, the eugenics movement spread across the country, and in Virginia, about 8,000 people were sterilized.
Do you remember a lot of what happened here?
Oh, yeah.
Rosemary Brooks is another victim. At 17 years old, this is a photo of her when she first came to the hospital. Today, Brooks walked us through the campus where she spent 11 years.
So do you remember all these old buildings too?
Oh, yeah.
Brooks says she lost her childhood here and now wants the state to do something to compensate her and other victims.
I said, why? You know, I said, nobody deserves to have this.
The victims are asking for compensation and for their medical records to be opened for family members if they pass away.
North Carolina approved compensation for $50,000 for each of the remaining sterilization victims. However, in Virginia, a similar compensation bill didn't get passed in the most recent budget. Mark Bold with the Christian Lions Institute has been working with the victims to get them what they deserve.
And unfortunately, we can't undo the past wrong, so the only method we can do is provide them some type of financial compensation to say, I'm sorry.
So far, fewer than 10 victims have come forward, all between the ages of 60 to 90. They say their time on Earth is now limited.
Virginia, they're waiting for us to die.
Looking back at a place that houses dark memories.
Yeah, that was a hospital, same hospital.
And a stay at the Central Virginia Training Center that still haunts them decades later.
No, it took until 2002 for formal apologies from a governor, which was then Governor Mark Warner, now Senator. And I also talked to Governor Terry McAuliffe today, and he told me that this was a very horrible and shameful period in the history of Virginia.
But still no movement towards reparations.
What would be the next step?
Well, I asked Governor Terry McAuliffe that, and he told me that he can't comment on if he'll bring the bill back next year.
The question now is how much of that oil is in the river and how much damage did it do? And we've had the opportunity to head out on the river today and take a look for ourselves. A bald eagle, 2.5 miles downstream from the fiery derailment. An example of the wildlife the James River Association is monitoring.
This is just a water sample that was taken about half a mile downstream. It's tough to tell, but this is just a clear, oily sheen of the top 1/4 inch here of the water line.
Rob Campbell is sampling the water. Eventually, the results will go to the EPA to be compared with other samples, all trying to determine any impact from the oil spill. There's still a couple of things we don't know yet. Number one, we don't know how much of the oil that came out of those tankers burned away as opposed to what leaked into the river. It may be months before we know that. In the meantime, the other question is, with the river being high like this, is that a good thing or a bad thing in terms of distributing that pollution?
You know, I'm not an environmentalist. I hear your question and it makes sense to me, but I really can't comment on that with any kind of expertise.
Out on the river, we see stains on vegetation and pools of oil along the river bank. Mason Baston, a former guide, says this will be bad not only for wildlife, but for businesses that depend upon the river.
Oh, it's going to crush them. It's going to absolutely crush them. Anybody that makes a living on this river will be directly affected in their bottom line by this event. The outfitters upriver, the outfitters downriver, everybody will be affected.
Meanwhile, watchdog groups like the Waterkeeper Alliance say this is an example of why tighter security and transparency are needed when it comes to rail transportation along our rivers.
This disaster just goes to show that we need transparency about the types of materials that are coming through our communities on rails. I mean, this happened right next to a downtown area, next to a public park, and it's scary. It's scary to think that this disaster could happen in a populated area like this.
In the meantime, crews continue to work on removing the 3 cars from the river and hoping they can prevent any more oil from spilling into the James. So the bottom line is, seeing that bald eagle today really brings home the fact that there is so much valuable wildlife just within a short distance of where I'm standing right now. And we'll continue to monitor the situation. The EPA said in their news conference today that it'll be 18 months before the investigation is complete. But I did talk with folks with Friends of the James River, and they say they'll be continuing to monitor the water on a daily basis.
You can see the oil right here.
This is what Scott Smith, chief scientist of water defense, refers to as Ground Zero, the site of the train derailment, which is now covered in oil. You can see it on the ground, the banks, and the tree line. With 50,000 gallons of crude oil unaccounted for, Smith is working to find out how much actually went into the James River. This is video they took from their boat at daybreak while testing the water.
How can anybody say that the spill's contained when you can see the oil line all the way down the banks of the river and flowing down the river?
This is a sample taken about 100 yards downstream from the wreckage site, where they actually take this Opflex material, string it through the water, and it absorbs that oil. And as you can tell, they've pulled quite a bit out of the area. In the long term, this should give them a better gauge of just how much oil was actually spilled into the river. After receiving clearance from officials, I was scheduled to go on the boat with Smith and his team. But he says shortly after he was taking water samples, our trip got shut down.
And we're confused because the state officials and the local officials will come out and say that there's no impact on the environment, the water's fine. And then we're told that even though this is public, that our access is blocked because there's chemicals in the water.
So we drove downriver with Smith as he took samples from the shoreline where oil had pulled, the same area where this pair of ducks landed. Smith says it could take weeks to know for sure if wildlife is affected. Smith's early assessment estimates at least 20,000 gallons of crude oil leaked into the James. That could have an impact 150 miles downstream in Richmond. In Lynchburg, Rachel Lucas, WSLS 10. Flames 80 feet high with billowing black smoke that could be seen for miles. An unforgettable sight after this CSX train derailed in the James River. Thankfully, no one was injured, but if the cars had derailed on the opposite side of the track into nearby businesses, it could have been much worse. This explosion, killing 47 in Quebec, stemmed from the same type of oil the Lynchburg train was carrying. Lynchburg was the 4th accident to happen in 10 months. Water defense scientist Scott Smith says typical crude oil wouldn't have caused this massive fireball.
That doesn't ignite easily, and trains derail with that, and it doesn't explode, it doesn't cause fires.
We wanted to know what makes Bakken different from other oil. This is a video Smith took of Bakken being fracked in North Dakota. During Smith's testing, acetone from this fracking process was found mixed in with the oil, which only makes it more flammable.
Now, most people think that all oil is flammable and an explosion like this would be typical, but you've actually set up an experiment to show us otherwise.
That's correct, and to my knowledge, this is the first experiment that will ever be done in the world. And number 2, fuel oil is transported by rail, by truck all the time and spills. And you're going to see it in this experiment, putting a match to it, it's like putting the match in water. And most people think that it lights easily, but it really doesn't.
And after attempting to light it several times, nothing. But when we took a sample of Bakken oil, the same that spilled in Lynchburg, it lit up in flames.
Smell that? It's like kerosene.
We showed this video to Hollywood actor and water defense founder Mark Ruffalo, who Skyped with us exclusively about the result.
It's flammable. What's your reaction to that?
When you were seeing these explosions, it doesn't make sense that, you know, for 40, 50 years we're transporting oil in this country, and never once had these kind of incredibly volatile explosions.
Now water defense is calling for more research on a national level.
We need these energy forms, but we also need our water, and so why don't we try to find a way for these two things to live peaceably.
The Department of Transportation is working with state leaders to continue testing the effects of Bakken crude oil. In Roanoke, Rachel Lucas, WSLS 10.
Insight about Jesse Matthew from a person who grew up with him. Matthew is charged with abduction with intent to defile in the disappearance of Hannah Graham. WSLS spoke exclusively with his best friend Michael Moore today. WSLS 10's Katie Love joins us live in the studio. Katie, what did Moore say about all of the charges?
Well, Michael Moore says he's shocked. He used to see Jesse Matthew almost every day. He says he doesn't believe his friend could be capable of that type of violence.
We've heard his name, we've seen his face, but who is Jesse Matthew? We know police believe he's connected to missing UVA student Hannah Graham.
I believe Jesse Matthew was the last person she was seen with before she vanished off the face of the earth.
But his best friend, Michael Moore, says that's not the guy he's known the last 25 years. Moore calls him LJ and says he has goals, ambition. He described him as a big, giant teddy bear who planned on bettering himself by taking classes at the community college in Charlottesville this fall.
When you see a picture of LJ, as you call him, like this in handcuffs, waiting to be seen before a judge, you know, what is that like for you?
It hurts me, because from what I'm getting from this picture, he's scared, he's nervous, he doesn't know what's going on.
After growing up with Matthew here in Charlottesville, I asked Moore what he thought about the rape accusation out of Liberty University. He said he didn't think his friend would be capable of that type of violence.
LJ is not the type to hurt a fly. LJ, he's a helper. I mean, he wants to help people. So for him to hurt someone, that's odd.
Moore says even with Matthew behind bars, he still plans to support the guy he calls his best friend.
And we are all behind LJ 100%.
I did ask Moore about the allegations that Matthew may have some sort of mental illness or learning disability. He says that's never been an issue for him growing up. He says if he could talk to him now, he would let him know that he wouldn't judge him no matter what happened.
After weeks of searching, new developments as crews searching for missing UVA student Hannah Graham find human remains. We have team coverage tonight on the recent developments out of Albemarle County. WSLS 10's Jade Hansen is in Charlottesville and talked with students on campus about this news. But first, we'll give you a brief recap of tonight's news conference. Charlottesville Police Chief Tim Longo and Albemarle County Police Chief Steve Sellers announced human remains were found in Albemarle County. Hannah Graham was last seen in the downtown Charlottesville area. We're told the remains found today were about 5 miles away from where Virginia Tech student Morgan Harrington was found after she had been kidnapped and murdered back in 2009. Today's news comes 5 weeks after Graham went missing.
Today's discovery is a significant development, and we have a great deal of work ahead of us. We cannot, and we will not jump to any conclusions regarding today's discovery, so I ask for the public's patience as we move forward and pursue what is now a new, ongoing death investigation.
Albemarle County Police are leading the investigation after human remains were found off Old Lynchburg Road in Albemarle County. Police were still on the scene tonight, searching for evidence and clues. They wouldn't confirm if the remains were that of missing UVA student Hannah Graham, but did talk to her family today.
Fairly shortly after that discovery, at a time that was most appropriate, Detective Sergeant James Mooney of the Charlottesville Police Department made a very difficult phone call and reached out to John and Susan Graham to share with them this preliminary discovery. Again, these are human remains, and forensic tests need to be conducted to determine the identification of those remains, but nonetheless, we wanted to be quick and timely to share that information excuse me, with the Graham family.
Charlottesville Police Chief Tim Longo says the investigation isn't over yet.
This investigation is complicated. It's a complex criminal investigation.
They are still looking for answers and information, asking anyone who lives in the area where the remains were found to come forward if they've seen any suspicious activity. Meanwhile, the chief thanked the community for their work.
I want to thank everyone who gave up their days, their nights, their weekends, people who called and wrote and dropped food and good wishes and words of encouragement to the search groups and to the detectives that have worked so hard in this investigation. I want to thank all of those people, because today would not have been possible, but not for their prayers, their encouragement, and their help.
As you can imagine, today's developments have made it a difficult day for the UVA campus community. WSLS 10's Jade Hansen joins us live from that campus tonight. You spent most of the night talking to the student body president and president of UVA's Help Save the Next Girl chapter. What's the feeling there?
Yes, Jenna, well, students here at UVA have started to learn about today's news within the last few hours, both from students talking about it on campus as well as social media. And as you can imagine, students here in Charlottesville are experiencing a number of emotions tonight. There's the obvious feeling of sadness in knowing that it's not likely that Hannah Graham will be returning home. I'm told by students that was something many had hoped for, but had begun to realize it was not likely going to happen within the last few weeks. And despite having that realization, they said today's news was still very hard to hear.
It was devastating. A silence fell over our group when we found out. And a lot of us didn't want it to be true, but at the same time wanted closure. So, conflicting emotions.
The story that began with tears now ends with tears, but this time a different kind.
Thank God, thank you, Jesus, and thank you to all the angels that have come to our rescue.
86-year-old Frank Hammett and his 79-year-old wife Dolores have lived in their Floyd County home the last 2 months without electricity. The couple's dire situation started 4 years ago when their son died. A $500 electric bill on his place went unpaid. And now, due to late fees and penalties, the family now owes AEP nearly $9,000. This is their 67th day living mostly here bundled up on their deck, but it's also their last.
Absolutely amazing. Makes you feel good about people.
People sit back and go, oh, there's no such thing as miracles. Of course there is.
After their story aired on WSLS 10 on Wednesday, viewers across Southwest Virginia rallied to their aid. A Roanoke County man created a GoFundMe account. He doesn't want any recognition, saying he just wanted to pay it forward. Donations poured in, and in less than 15 hours, concerned citizens helped raise more than $10,000.
People sit back and go, oh, there's no such thing as miracles. Of course there is.
The couple says it's been the longest 2 months of their lives. No power, no lights, no refrigeration, living off of crated food and bottled water. But now a burden they carried for years has been lifted.
It's going to be great. I miss all that, being able to watch TV and see the different things, you know.
Be thankful the rest of the day and the rest of my life. I pray I live to be 189 so that I can give back those many years.
Kids with autism oftentimes feel left out. And a month ago, one local high school student thought he'd be left out of his high school prom. That is until one Northside High School senior with a big heart asked Joshua Smith to the dance and changed everything. This is the moment Joshua Smith has talked about for a year now. But it was an uncertain journey reaching this teenage milestone. Josh's mom, Kathy, wasn't sure she would get to see the day her son put on a tux and jumped in a limo on his way to pick up his prom date. Joshua was autistic, and Kathy knew it would take a special young lady to take her son to the big dance. That special girl happens to be fellow senior Bridget Neal, whose brother Daniel is also autistic.
I've been looking forward to him being a part of something like this since he started talking about prom, and when I wasn't sure he was going to be a part of prom.
And he was looking forward to it too. Start time for prom is 8 o'clock, but Kathy says Josh woke up at 6:30 in the morning going, it's prom day.
We steamed out the tux, steamed the shirt, and sat and waited. Vince waited, and he was looking at the clock. Is it time yet? It's not time yet, Joshua.
Finally, Josh got out of the limo to see his date for the first time. He'd never given a girl a corsage before.
Thank you. That's beautiful, Josh.
And just like that, prom night had begun.
She was too beautiful. I didn't have words when I saw her. Wow was the first thing that came to mind because she just looks so beautiful, and the burgundy color is her color. And I just looked at her and I started crying.
Had it not been for Kathy's Facebook post, these pictures at Hotel Roanoke and the Vinton War Memorial never would have been taken. And this prom never would have happened for Josh.
I hope that he remembers this night forever, and he remembers how much fun it was and how happy he was.
Bridget and Josh gather with friends on the dance floor, as high schoolers have for generations. A tradition just a month ago Josh had little hope of being a part of until Bridget picked up the phone.
You don't have to do like huge things to like make somebody else happy.
I am beholding to Bridget for being the not teenager that I expected. I am beholding to her mother and her dad for raising her right. And I have no other words because she's just awesome. She is my prom queen.
They had so much fun Saturday night, and Kathy says that she basically told Josh, okay, Josh, time to go home now. He wanted to stay.
He wanted to stay all night, right?
He wanted to stay
After
all
the
night.
prom was over.
After the prom, yes.
Yeah,
so they had a great time.
Prom does end.
Yeah, there was an ending time. So they were, it was just very special.
It really was. We enjoyed that story all the way through.
It's been a mess out here for the past several hours. We've been out here since about 4 o'clock, and we've seen just different cars coming through. This backup that I'm looking at here has been out here since earlier today. It's at mile marker 141, and we're told that this was caused by a disabled vehicle and that the backup reached to about 5 miles. Now, that backup that Aaron talked about earlier today, that one at 113, that ended up being about 13 miles long. When I spoke with Jason Bond from VDOT, he told me that that backup was created by a domino effect. One person that got stuck in that area, and that caused other cars to lose momentum, and then it just got worse and worse. Now, I also spoke with VDOT about why the roads still seem to be a little bit covered with snow, and he was telling me that the issue that some of the plows are having is that once the snow came down so rapidly and there was so much snow that once the crews came out, plowed the roads, that it just got covered all over again. So they're just urging people to stay off the roads if you don't have to be out here, so that the plow crews can come through and get the roads clear. For now, we're live in Roanoke. Bree Jackson, WSLS 10.
Okay, thank you, Bree. And with all the snow, it's not only causing backups, but cars are getting stranded as well. WSLS 10's Katie Love joins us live now. She's at our position at the Roanoke Civic Center with more on that. Hi, Katie. Stranded cars.
That's right, John. One of the challenges drivers are having to deal with, or people just walking around the area, are big piles of snow looking something like the ones here at the Roanoke Civic Center. Now, of course, that's from those plows trying to push the snow off the roads and get them onto the curbs or wherever they can. And although I want to jump into the big pile behind me, I won't, because I have to look halfway decent on TV. Now, earlier today, we saw several cars getting stuck, and that was difficult for many people, including ourselves. Now, also, you might have gone out this morning and not realized where your car was because it was covered in snow. We saw several cars in downtown Roanoke, especially, that were unrecognizable because they had snow just covered on top of them. And that's some of the challenges that people are going to have today. The Roanoke Fire EMS chief was talking about this yesterday. He said as people start to get out into their cars, that's when they see those injuries, those back strains, muscle strains. He asked for people to take it easy and be careful. Now, the other thing is that Virginia State Police has released a number of traffic accidents. So far, they have received thousands of calls, and that's just across the state. And right here in Roanoke, EMS has received hundreds of calls, 76 disabled vehicles, and those are those cars stranded on the side of the roads and EMS having to make their way to them. Now, the other thing you want to remember, though, only dial 911 if it's an extreme emergency. We've got crews out everywhere tonight, and they want to make sure to get to the most in-need people as possible. Well, live in downtown Roanoke, Katie Love, WSLS 10.
All right, we want to move on now to probably the most exciting story of the day for Karen and me. The rain may stop some construction, but it did not keep us from starting the WSLS 10 and Habitat for Humanity home build this morning.
That's true. Dozens of people from WSLS, the community, and Habitat all gathered this morning to get started on a project for the Garcia family, who called the rescue mission home just 2 years ago.
And now, in just a few short weeks before Christmas, they'll be spending the holidays under a new roof.
Having a home, it's so amazing, it's great, and it's a blessing. Like I always said, everything falls in place, and I really appreciate everybody's hard work.
Veronica's been working hard herself, putting in hundreds of hours of what they call sweat equity in other Habitat homes, and she'll be helping us with this project today and the next few weeks. But this kind of work is fun. As we all got to know Veronica Garcia a little better, goodwill quickly turned to good work.
Okay, here we go.
From John and I carrying the front door to her new home,
it's best to check both sides,
to Jeff Hanowich and Jonna Pacello installing windows, Jenna Zibton hammering nails,
got it. Yeah,
look at that, that's terrible.
And Lindsay Ward, and Patrick McKee, too. We all wore different hats today, the WSLS family working together for the Garcias.
We probably shouldn't quit our day jobs.
No. We started making the Garcia family home a reality in the rain on Tuesday, working on what we could with dozens of volunteers.
1, 2, 3.
Then Wednesday was an impressive day with the walls being raised. And while this time lapse shows the work at a super fast pace, it's truer to life than what some might think. That same day, a crane arrived to put the trusses in place, and we got an aerial view of the action. This is one of the fastest Habitat for Humanity home builds that's ever been done in the Roanoke Valley.
Ready?
By the end of Thursday, day 3, all doors and windows and shingles are in place. Interior walls are set and all electrical, plumbing, and HVAC systems installed. Now, on day 4, more of the WSLS family and others hammered nails. We found meteorologist Christina Montori has many talents in addition to forecasting. The drywall was delivered, so the inside will really start to take shape soon. By the end of the day, the project is ready for the next step.
Cabinets, flooring, doors, all the trim around the house. So all the stuff that is the finished look of it, you're going to start seeing come the end of next week.
And knowing this house will be a home for the holidays for the Garcia family makes all the hard work worth it.
Now we have a place that we call home for many years to come. We appreciate and thank every single person for making this house possible, and everyone who is here standing with us. We are at your service, and we'll welcome you to the Garcia family home.
Oh, thank you, Veronica.
So what do you think? You want to do the keys now?
I think we should. Okay. We are joined by our more than half a dozen sponsors that Veronica mentioned in her beautiful speech. And so I think she's ready to get those keys, John.
Veronica, if you would step over here with me. On behalf of all of the sponsors, all the volunteers, Habitat for Humanity, WSLS, and all the people that you just mentioned, congratulations. And there are the keys to your new home.
They're very jolly, yes. They'll be used for jingle bells. And so we'll do the ribbon cutting. We'll let you all, if you all want to do the ribbon cutting together.
Come on, there you go. We'll count down from 5, okay? Here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Yay!
Yay!
Leadership. So that's what we're going to do. We're all going to go out there and lead us into victory, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm carrying on. I'm introducing him to a whole new generation. I can't tell you how many times I do this in front of kids where maybe 2, 3 years later, they actually stop me. Their first remark is, "You've changed my life." Gentlemen, we're going to relentlessly chase perfection, knowing full well we'll never catch it, because nothing is perfect.
I'm hoping that they will remember that the personification of Vince Lombardi was actually in their locker room, and they had a famous Lombardi speech presented to them that hopefully will pump them up enough and that they'll carry that heart out onto the football field.
But I firmly hold that a person's finest hours are that moment when he has worked his heart out in a good cause and is exhausted on the field of battle, victorious. Leave no regrets on the field. I don't want to hear that 10 years from now you're saying I should have done this. Just do it. Don't regret the time you have. Enjoy it, but live it to its full potential. Gentlemen, we have a football team, and we're going to win that football game. You know why? Because you're going to have confidence in you and your system. By being alert, you're going to make fewer mistakes than your opponent. And by working harder, you're going to out-execute, out-block, and out-tackle any opponent that comes your way.
New at 6 tonight, the story of what might have been. It's been 55 years since Piedmont Airlines Flight 349 crashed into a mountain outside of Crozet, killing 26 of the 27 people on board. Remarkably, these many years later, large pieces of the wreckage remain on the mountain. And tonight, in Virginia Crossroads, a story from that crash that's never been told. It's not easy to get to the site where Piedmont Flight 349 crashed on a foggy night on October 30th of 1959. Local landowner Ballman Abbott led us via four-wheel drive to a place where we could hike down to the site from the top of Buck's Elbow Mountain.
This is just the last time I hiked down to the crash. I just made some notes.
Though shorter than the 6-mile trek from the bottom of the mountain, the terrain is steep and strewn with loose rock. There is no trail.
But I'm thinking it's down in this area.
With Ballman's help, we pick our way to the wreckage. Our group includes members of the Crozet Rescue Squad who've never been to the crash site, and one man with a special reason to be here.
The very first thing you think of is what could have been.
Chuck McFarland's father had hoped to be on Flight 349, but he was late to the airport.
A couple weeks after the incident, we were at home, and he simply said quietly, I was supposed to be on that plane, but I was late to the airport.
McFarland didn't know for 50 years that anything was left at the crash site, but thanks to the internet, he learned there was plenty to see, and he had to see it.
As soon as I learned that, I knew I had to make it here.
Remarkably, because of the flight's lone survivor, Phil Bradley, we know a lot about the final moments of the doomed flight. We know that Bradley himself was stuck in the woods, still strapped to his airplane seat for nearly 3 days, while authorities searched for the missing DC-3. The biggest piece of the wreckage is on the hillside right behind me, but if you walk around in the woods, even 55 years later, you can still find pieces that are this side, just scattered here and among the leaves. And we can't really imagine what it must have been like for Phil Bradley when he woke up still strapped to his airplane seat to look around and see the bodies of the passengers who didn't survive scattered all around him here in these same woods. It was awful. Jesse Seal doesn't have to imagine it. At the time, he was 14 and a local, and he arrived at the scene about the same time as rescuers.
Some of the people were still in their seatbelts to some degree. Not many in the plane itself. It just kind of disintegrated there, you know.
When you arrived there, what did the scene look like?
Like something you've seen in the movies.
And then there's Alvin Toms, who helped carry the dead out on stretchers and spent the first night in the woods protecting the wreckage from would-be human scavengers. He told me how difficult it was to carry the human remains up that steep slope that we ourselves had just navigated. What was it like to carry those stretchers up the side of that mountain?
You go about 10 steps and somebody else would have to relieve you.
Today, the site remains a difficult-to-reach curiosity. Pieces of metal, an old beer can, and unknown plane parts scattered in the woods, for all except Chuck McFarland, whose father, had he made the plane, likely would have lost his life here on Buck's Elbow Mountain.
And I'm going to try to take as small a piece of aluminum as I can, and I want to poke that little piece into the ground next to their gravesite.
A long hike and a tiny bit of closure for a man whose own life might have been so very different. Many of the people on that plane had ties to this area as it was headed to Charlottesville and Lynchburg from Washington. The cause of that plane crash is in dispute to this very day.